Documentary of credit is a document sent from a bank or financial institute that guarantees that a seller will receive a buyer's payment on time and for the full amount. It is widely used, particularly in sale transactions where the seller and the buyer are not residing in the same country. Documentary of credit, also known as letter of credit, dealing with someone you don't know or see is very dangerous, especially when the sales involve such a huge amount of money and expensive goods. In Malaysia, letter of credit, either conventional or Islamic, has also been used as a method of payment in international trade. The operational aspects of Islamic are very similar to the conventional letter of credit. It is governed by the same UCP, which standardizes the operational aspects of various international financial instruments. An Islamic letter of credit can be issued using either the principle of al-wakalah, al-mudarabah, or al-musharakah. But even though they have a lot of similar, but somehow it still have the difference between Islamic and conventional banking.
Forms of documentary credit consist of revocable and irrevocable and confirmed credit. What is revocable and irrevocable? It is an undertaking that guarantees the bank's issued payment for any services or good purchased. It is non-cancelable during a specified period. Any cancellation or amendment of the documentary credit can only be made when the beneficiary has agreed. Revocable credit are the ones that can be cancelled without the beneficiary consent at any time and do not offer any adequate security. A credit by default is irrevocable. Typically, banks do not authorize a revocable credit. Next is confirmed credit. Confirmation refers to a definite undertaking by the confirming and issuing bank for honoring or negotiating a complying representation. It is a precondition included in the sale contract and requested by the seller at the time of agreeing to the sale of goods or services. The seller usually requests this under the following circumstances, which are documentary risk, country risk, and the risk of issuing bank. Now is form of payment. In the side, payment at site with a nominated bank means that when the nominated bank determines that a presentation made to it is complying, it may honor by the paying the beneficiary. To be reimbursed, the nominated bank must forward the documents to the issuing bank or confirming bank. If the nominated bank is also a confirming bank, it must pay the beneficiary at site for a complying presentation. Unless the nominated bank is a confirming bank, it has no obligation to pay the beneficiary at site for a complying presentation and may forward the documents to the issuing bank for payment. Deferred side, which is if a credit is available with a nominated bank by deferred payment, the nominated bank may honor by incurring a deferred payment undertaking for a complying presentation. By incurring a deferred payment undertaking, the nominated bank undertakes to pay the beneficiary at maturity. This is regardless of whether the nominated bank is a confirming bank, because by incurring a deferred payment undertaking, the nominated bank has an obligation to pay at maturity, independent of the issuing bank's undertaking. If the nominated bank is also a confirming bank, a deferred payment undertaking is incurred when a complying presentation is met and the confirming bank must pay at maturity. Acceptance side, which is if a credit is available with nominated bank by accepting, the nominated bank may honor by accept a draft drawn on it for a complying presentation. By accepting a draft, the nominated bank undertakes to pay the beneficiary at maturity. Before accepting the draft, the nominated bank has to be careful to examine the presentation to determine that it is complying with the credit, as acceptance of a draft represents an unconditional and irrevocable promise by the drawee accepted to pay. To reimburse, the nominated bank must forward the document to the issuing bank or confirming bank. Honor of credit available by acceptance is without resource to the beneficiary, regardless of whether the nominated bank that honor is a confirming bank. This is because it honors by accepting a draft drawn on itself, and thus incurs its own independent payment obligation under the draft. If the nominated bank is also a confirming bank, a complying presentation made to it obligates to the bank to honor, and it must pay at maturity. Last but not least, I will talk about negotiation. If a credit is available with a nominated bank by negotiation, the nominated bank may negotiate a complying presentation. The draft must be drawn on a bank other than the nominated bank, and this differentiates negotiation from acceptance. Purchase is by way of the nominated bank advancing funds to the beneficiary before the date that reimbursement is due from the issuing bank. Alternatively, the purchase may be by way of the nominated bank agreeing to advance funds to the beneficiary on or before the date that reimbursement is due from the issuing bank. To reimburse, the nominated bank must forward the document to the issuing bank or confirming bank. If the nominated bank is also a confirming bank, it must negotiate without resource a complying presentation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohamed Amsyar bin Usmardi. My matric number is 2737787. So today we'll talk about the application for documentary credits. The documents required for documentary credits are commercial documents, transport documents, official documents, financial documents, and insurance documents. For commercial documents, it required by the buyer to show evidence that he is likely to get the goods that he has ordered. Commercial document consists of indent, commercial invoice, export invoice, receipt, and pro forma invoice. Indent is a written purchase order initiated by the importer to the exporter or its agents. Indents, there are two types of indent, which is open indent and closed indent. For commercial invoice, it is one of the main documents prepared by the exporter and delivered through its banker for presentation to the importer. And then export invoice, generally prepared in two copies. One is kept by the exporter and another one is delivered to the importer together with a bill of lading. Next is receipt, a document that shows whether an amount owed has been settled or not. It is a confirmation by the exporter on the origins of the goods. The confirmation normally requires the endorsement of the local chamber of commerce of the exporter's country. The last one is pro forma invoice. It is generally sent by seller to a potential buyer, indicate details of the goods and their pricing and other charges. Only when the buyer places a firm order, the goods are shipped out and the relevant documents will be issued and sent. Next is transport documents. Often serve as a document of title to the goods, enabling the holder to take possession of the goods. It consists of bill of lading and airway bill. For bill of lading, it is issued by or on behalf of the master of a ship to certify that the goods have been received by the shipping company for transportation and delivery. It also shows terms and conditions under which the shipping company undertakes to transport the goods. Next is airway bill, also known as air consignment note, issued by airlines when goods are sent by air freight. Goods will be released to the consignee upon identification. Next is official documents, which is cover documents required for government or custom purposes. It consists of consulate invoice, certificate of origins, import license, and certificate of inspection. So for the consulate invoice, normally obtained from the office of the embassy of the importer in the country of the exporter, the purpose is to confirm that the goods has been approved for delivery to the importer's country. This document is normally required when an importing country practices import duty based on ad valorem. Next is certificate of origins. It provides information about the country where the goods originate. It is a confirmation by the exporter on the origin of the goods. The confirmation normally requires endorsements of the local chamber of commerce of the exporter's country. The next document is import license. It is needed to import certain goods when a country restricts imports in general, or when a country wishes to protect a particular local industry from foreign competition. The import license is obtained by the foreign importer and sent to the exporter. The last one is certificate of inspection, issued by an independent or third-party resident in the exporter's country, stating that the goods conform to a certain standard. Buyers call for this document to ensure that the seller is supplying the goods of the required quality, specification, and quantity as contracted. The next document is financial documents. Financial documents consist of bill of exchange and letter of credit. Bill of exchange is an agreement signed by the buyer of the goods to pay seller a certain sum of money on a specific future date. Each international trade transaction generates its own bill of exchange. And for the letter of credit, and letter of credit is an undertaking given by the importer's bank, which is called issuing bank, exchanged upon the request of the importer, that will make payment to a beneficiary, which is the exporter. A letter of credit involves four parties, which are the importer, importer's bank, issuing bank, exporter, and the exporter's bank, which is advising bank. The last documents is insurance documents, which is insurance cover notes. This document issued by insurance companies, underwriters, or agents indemnify the assured against any losses or damage to the goods arising from the transportation of the goods from one place to another.
Assalamualaikum and hi, I am Mohamed Afiq bin Mohamed Rodzi, metric number 273705. We'll continue and share our presentation on opening and advising documentary credit, and also on the topic of making amendment of the documentary credit. Please note that the term documentary credit and the letter of credit that I will use is referred to the same letter or document. First, the opening documentary credit. Importer will apply to an opening bank, which is the importer's bank, to open documentary credit, whose beneficiary is the exporter. Importer must complete and sign forms to formalize their application. In some cases, an application letter of opening may be sufficient. If the documentary credit can be referred to the contract, bank is not bound by the terms of the contract. It must only follow the instructions given by the customer in the application form. After receipt of the request, the bank conducts a thorough examination of client's situation. The bank may feel that the transaction is too risky and reject the request. Otherwise, it may ask the client to make an advance deposit for opening of the credit or give him a payment on his usual line of credit. Next, let's move on to the advising documentary credit. Usually when the exporter enter a sale of contract, he will appoint a bank to take reasonable care to verify the authenticity of credits received and then accurately transmit them to their beneficiaries. When advising a letter of credit, the bank assumes no other liability. On receipt of the documents for examination and payment, the advising bank will pay the seller only if it has received good funds from the issuing bank, even if it was specifically named as paying bank in the letter of credit. Moving to the next part, the amendment of documentary credit. An amendment can be made at any time after the documentary credit has been authorized and before its expiry date. Let's see the procedure for amending documentary credit or letter of credit. For each amendment, a new version of letter of credit will be generated. Different versions of the letter of credit will be generated by events like reinstatement and reopening. When a customer requests for changes in the terms of the contract, the details of the letter of credit are amended accordingly and an amendment instrument is generated. Purpose of the amendment includes, first, to amend the LC amount or to amend the letter of credit amount, next to amend the expiry date, to change latest shipment date, and to change any free format instruction for the letter of credit. Next, the process for amending the letter of credit. First, seller requests a modification or amendment of any unacceptable terms in the letter of the credit. Second, if the terms are agreed, buyer issues order to his bank to make an amendment to the terms of the letter of the credit. Third, buyer's bank notifies seller's bank of amendment through the advising bank. Lastly, seller's bank notifies seller of amendment. Next, the commission and charge for doing any amendment. We can specify the commissions and charge that we want to levy for processing the amendment. It will be effective from the date if amendment and will not affect booking commission in any way. For amendment of an unauthorized letter of credit or documentary credit, the amendment of an unauthorized document of letter of credit is considered as a modification, an act for modified the letter of credit. So when the letter of credit that you have entered is not yet authorized, so you can change all its details except the details in the header, which may also include the contract reference number, the product and type of operation. So to change any detail on the letter of credit that has been stored and not yet authorized, just delete the letter of credit and input a new one.
Complying presentation means a presentation that is in accordance with the terms and conditions of the credit, the applicable provisions of UCP 600 and international standard banking practice. This is further expanded as below. A compliant presentation made to a nominated bank is binding on the issuing bank and any confirming bank, which must then honour. The issuing bank undertakes to reimburse a nominated bank that has honoured or negotiated a compliant presentation and that has forwarded the documents to the issuing bank. A confirming bank will also incur a similar undertaking to reimburse a nominated bank that has honoured or negotiated a compliant presentation and that has forwarded the documents to the confirming bank. Meanwhile, in Article 2 of UCP 600, negotiation means the purchase by the nominated bank of drafts or documents under a compliant presentation by advancing or agreeing to advance funds to the beneficiary on or before the banking day on which reimbursement is due to the nominated bank. The letter of credit must state whether it is available by side payment, deferred payment, acceptance or negotiation. Article 39 of UCP 600 is regarding assignment of proceeds. To summarize, the extent and legal effect of assignment of proceeds under a letter of credit is determined by local laws. It is possible in some cases for the beneficiary to ask nominated bank or issuing bank to reserve part of the proceeds to be paid to its supplier. This request is worded in the form of irrevocable instruction. The bank then tells the supplier in the form of bank letter that it has received irrevocable instructions to make the relevant payment to the supplier out of the documentary credit proceeds. The bank will not undertake any payment or guarantee obligation towards supplier. The bank will not undertake any payment or guarantee obligation towards such supplier, and this should be made clear in the bank's letter given to the supplier. The bank merely acts as an agent for payment of the money received on behalf of the beneficiary or the seller. The bank should exercise care in wording the bank letter to avoid any risk that it might be called on to pay the supplier if it does not have free use of the proceeds received from performance of the documentary credit. This situation will arise if, for instance, the proceeds were seized by a creditor of the beneficiary. For example, let's take a common scenario that the creditor was supposed to give $1,000 to beneficiary through bank. Beneficiary has given irrevocable instruction to bank to pay $500 to its supplier, $50 being the fixed bank charges irrespective of the transaction amount. Remaining proceeds of $450 has to be credited to the beneficiary. Now, considering the above instruction, let us say that the creditor has seized the proceeds. In that case, bank is not responsible to make any payment to the supplier. Discrepancy can be defined as an error or defect according to the issuing bank in the presented documents compared to the documentary credit, the UCP 600 rules, or other documents that have been presented under the same letter of credit. There are some common discrepancies in letter of credit, including inconsistency in documents, incorrect data, and late shipment, and many more. In order to resolve the discrepancy, the negotiating bank will notify the beneficiary that the documents presented contains discrepancies. If the beneficiary cannot correct such documents within the limits of the letter of credit, the beneficiary will instruct the negotiating bank to either correct as far as possible, request the bank to contact the issuing bank to seek waiver from the applicant, or request the bank to forward the documents to the issuing bank for settlement despite the discrepancies that have been noted. It must be remembered that the beneficiary or presenter has the right to correct any discrepancies that may have been observed. This must, however, be concluded within the last day for the presentation or expiry date, whichever is the earliest. As for issuing bank option, the issuing bank may seek waiver from the applicant for the discrepancies that have been determined. The issuing bank is under no obligation to accept the waiver of the applicant. It may be following the sending of a notice of refusal that the bank is convinced that the discrepancy is not valid and the documents do comply. In this case, the bank must take up the documents according to the credit terms. If the bank is the issuing bank, they will need to inform the applicant that the discrepancy has been withdrawn and that the presentation complies. In Islamic documentary credit, one of the ways to solve discrepancies is through the implementation of maqasid syariah. The minor discrepancy should be passed over without penalties being imposed. We should, in this stage, implement the maqasid of syariah to address and resolve the problem. This is particularly recommended where there is zero risk to the bank from accepting the discrepancy. This applies where the bank acts strictly as agent for the importer who opens the letter of credit against 100% cash margin. The client is taking all the risks and the bank should not be entitled to impose a penalty where the importer accepts the documents with discrepancies.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohamed Haziq bin Ridzuan and my metric number is 273721. Okay, for my part in this presentation, I will present about the bank's documentary credit responsibilities. Okay, first of all, I will explain about the scope of the bank's responsibilities. Okay, before analyzing the wording of the disclaimers used, the scope of the responsibilities undertaken by the banks involved must be identified, whereas the type of credit and the documentary stipulation therein will usually have been negotiated by the commercial parties and included in their sales contract. Okay, for the first point of the responsibilities is to issue an efficacious credit. The importer's failure to procure the issue of a documentary credit which conforms to the terms of the sales contract may be treated by the exporter as a breach of a condition precedent to his performance and a repudiation of the contract by the importer. Whether the applicant can sue the issuing bank in respect of its culpable failure to issue an efficacious credit is, however, by no means clear. Okay, for the next point is the responsibilities is to issue a confirming credit. Okay, an initial problem arises when the applicant requires the issue of confirmed credit, that is a credit in which a second bank, normally in the beneficiary's country, adds its own independent undertaking to pay against the stipulated documents. Okay, for the next point is the duty to receive, and the responsibilities is to receive and examine documents. Okay, the doctrine of strict compliance means that issuing bank which pay against non-conforming documents are in breach of their contractual obligation to the applicant. The issuer is not, however, a guarantor of the document conformity. Its duty is discharged by the exercise of reasonable care to ascertain that the documents comply on their face with the terms of the credit. Okay, for the last point is the duty to make payment under the terms of the credit. Okay, the party with the primary interest is enforcing the bank's obligation to pay against confirming documents is the beneficiary. Although it is clear, this obligation is also owed to the applicant. Furthermore, any variation of the payment terms would be clear breach of contract. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you.